Presenting petitions, Présentation des Petitions, the Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre.
The first one is a petition calling by the undersigned, calling upon the government to reverse the cuts in services announced by Canada Post and to instead look for ways to innovate in areas such as postal banking. A second one, that the undersigned acknowledge the current impaired driving laws are too lenient. In the interest of public safety, as citizens of Canada, they want to see tougher laws and the implementation of new mandatory minimum sentencing. Two petitions, Mr. Speaker, that call upon the government to review thoroughly and change their policy on blood and organ donation in Canada. We ask that sexual preferences of people not be an instant refusal of the right to donate. A large one, Mr. Speaker, calling upon the government of Canada to make several changes to the current drinking and driving laws in Canada and to make a change to the Criminal Code of Canada in respect of penalties. And my favorite, Mr. Speaker, is a petition signed by 26 Canadians who, I won't bother with the preamble, their petitioners request the House of Commons to take out of storage the last remaining Avro Arrow and to stop the needless spending of our tax dollars to keep it in storage. The Avro Arrow today should be considered a museum piece to pay tribute to Canada's contribution in the advancements of science and technology, of which we still need.
I'm just going to stop the Honourable Member there. There are many members rising, and if each member took a full minute, we wouldn't get everybody in. So I'm going to do two things. One, ask members to very quickly present their petitions, especially when they have multiple ones, and for those who aren't presenting petitions, to either remain in their seats or to take their conversations outside. The Honourable Member for Sudbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise in the chamber to table a series of petitions signed by a great deal of Canadians, most of them from my great riding of Sudbury. They call on the government to reverse the cuts to services announced by Canada Post and to look instead for ways to innovate, for example, by establishing postal banking services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Random, Buren, St. George's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise to present two different petitions on behalf of my constituents. With what is happening with Canada Post and their decision to reduce services, particularly in rural communities, I have petitions here, particularly from the residents of Harbour Breton and surrounding area, asking the government to get after Canada Post to stop doing this because of the harm it's doing in the communities, in particular those areas where they do not have high-speed internet, and the fact of the matter that this is the only service in some rural communities where they can go and get not just postal service, but other service as well. The other one, Mr. Speaker, that I want to present is just on behalf of residents who want a ban on hydraulic fracturing, and they're calling on the Government of Canada to impose this ban as soon as possible.
The Honourable Member for Brant.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to present this petition from individuals in my riding in support of Private Member's Bill C-560 for amendments to the Divorce Act.
The Honourable Member for New Westminster Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present a petition from Canadians who want the government to take measures to stop the global practice of shark finning and to ensure the responsible conservation and management of sharks, and to call on the government to immediately legislate a ban on the importation of shark fin to Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bonavista, Gannon, Grand Falls, Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This petition comes from residents in 4 islands, New World Island, Twillingate Island, Change Islands, and Fogo Island. There is a sunken paper carrier since 1985. It's now starting to spew oil. It has been for the past year or perhaps even more. The constituents here, residents of Newfoundland and Labrador, are imploring the government to not come up with a short-term solution, but for a long-term solution to get the oil out of that boat before a major environmental catastrophe. Thank you very much.
Honourable Member for Mississauga South, Streetsville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present a petition today on behalf of members of the Canadian Anaphylaxis Initiative who are asking Parliament to enact a policy to reduce the risk of anaphylactic reaction for passengers applicable to all forms of passenger transportation in the federal jurisdiction.
The Honourable Member for Acadie Bathurst.
I am presenting a petition signed by over 500 people across the country. They call upon the government to contribute to the funding necessary to repair the maintenance of the track between Bathurst and Miramichi and to obtain a guarantee that Canadian National will keep the line between Bathurst and Miramichi open in order to maintain via rail service in eastern New Brunswick and Quebec. Monsieur le Président, j'ai une autre pétition.
Mr. Speaker, I have another petition. 350 people have signed it. They call on the Government of Canada to help with the repair of the railway between Bathurst and Miramichi. They call on the government to invest the necessary money and to maintain that stretch of rail and passenger rail service in eastern New Brunswick and Quebec. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I rise to present a petition that speaks to the fact that any donation of blood and organs should be based on evidence and testing and not on stereotyping, and that persons who are denied the right to donate blood and organs because of sexual orientation may very well be unconstitutional, and that any person should have the right to donate blood and organs on a universal basis. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I present a petition today from a number of petitioners from my riding in the Waterloo region. They're asking Parliament to refrain from making any changes to the Seeds Act or to the Plant Breeders' Rights Act through Bill C-18. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Newton North Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand on behalf of constituents in my riding of Newton North Delta in support of the I Can Donate campaign. These petitioners are calling on the government to change the policy on blood, organ and bone marrow donation in Canada. They are asking that sexual preference not be an instant refusal for a person's right to donate. I have two petitions here, and Mr. Speaker, I have further two petitions. And I rise today on behalf of my constituents in Newton North Delta to present the following two petitions, each in protest of the Conservative government's decision to end door-to-door mail delivery for Canadians, increase postal rates, and close post offices across this country. Mr. Speaker, via this petition, my constituents ask the government to reverse these job-killing changes.
I'm going to have to remember there are still many members rising, and we're now down to about 8 minutes. So I'm going to ask members to redouble their efforts to be brief. The L'Honorable Député de Brossard-la-Prairie.
The member for Brossard-la-Prairie.
Will not be an instant refusal of the right to donate. They request that the government return the rights of any healthy Canadian to give the gift of blood, bone marrow, and organs to those in need. No matter the race, religion, or sexual preference of a person, the right to give blood or donate organs is universal to any healthy man or woman.
Member for Langley.
I have two petitions I'm honored to present. The first is from a number of Canadians representing 92% of Canadians calling on Parliament to condemn the practice of discriminating against girls through sex-selective pregnancy termination. The second petition highlights that Cassandra Collias was killed by a drunk driver. The petition from Families for Justice is calling on much more stringent sentencing, actually mandatory minimum sentencing for anyone found convicted of driving while impaired and causing death. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sandusky Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honor today to present some petitions
for a full investigation into the 2011 misuse of telephone calls to mislead voters, called the robocall scandal. Despite recent reports from Elections Canada, the report of Mr. Justice Mosley to the Ontario Court leaves many questions unanswered, and an inquiry is called for. The second petition, Mr. Speaker, is from residents of my own riding, in Sandusky Islands, primarily from Pender Island, calling for the government to fully study any proposal and for tankers and pipelines along the BC coast, and to reject those that pose excessive risk.
Honourable Member for York South-Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have petition. The residents of my riding have signed and continue to sign a number of petitions protesting the loss of home mail delivery by Canada Post. They call upon the Government of Canada to reject Canada Post's plan for reduced services and to explore other options to update Canada Post's business plan. As well, I have the pleasure of tabling petitions in support of the I Can Donate campaign to permit blood, bone marrow, and organ donations from any healthy Canadian, no matter their race, religion, or sexual preference.
Honourable Member for Barrie.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to present two petitions on Bill C-442, the National Lyme Disease Strategy. I also rise, Mr. Speaker, to present three petitions on Bill C-18, the Seeds Act, and I rise, Mr. Speaker, to also present a petition from numerous constituents on proportional representation. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, I rise to present a petition of several hundred constituents on human rights abuses in Venezuela.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try to be very brief. I'm rising to present two petitions from residents of Alberta and Saskatchewan asking the government to reverse the cuts to postal service. The second petition, Mr. Speaker, is also on the campaign calling on the Government of Canada to reverse its policy denying the donation of blood based on sexual preferences.
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Speaker, I rise to table 6 petitions for the I Donate campaign on behalf of numerous Canadians asking for the government to review thoroughly and change their policy on blood and organ donation to Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Davenport.
Speaker, I rise on behalf of residents in my riding of Davenport and the great city of Toronto, and these are folks from streets like Dufferin and Lindsay and Rusholme and Macklin. They want the government to ban pay-to-pay fees. These are the fees that companies charge largely seniors and those on fixed income to get their bills in the mail. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have a petition from residents of Canada who call on the Government of Canada to review thoroughly and change policy on blood and organ donation in Canada. They understand absolutely that people should be pre-tested for disease, and if they fail, they cannot donate. However, they request that the Government of Canada return the rights of any healthy Canadian to give the gift of blood, bone marrow, and organs to those in need, no matter what the race, religion, or sexual preference of that person.
For Algoma, Manitoulin, and Kapuskasing.
Mr. Speaker, je me lève en chambre.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in the House to table a petition signed by people from Shablu, Wawa, and other areas. It's with regard to the Algoma Central Railway and the crisis the government created when it removed its subsidy. Now, the government has reinstated funding for this year, but concerns remain. So these people want to see the right changes made after vast consultations with interested parties. I have another petition.
Extra fees and consumer rip-offs. Now, unfortunately, the petition, the clerk has said that the petition can't be tabled in the House. However, I know that about a month ago, we did ask unanimous consent to table the petition on the government side, so I'm hoping if we could do the same today.
Does the Honourable Member have unanimous consent to the House to table petition that doesn't seem to be in the proper form? Agreed? Agreed. The Honourable Member for Rivière des Milieux.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the pleasure to table a petition calling on the Government of Canada to create an urban workplace strategy to help people looking for work in urban areas. The Honourable Member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have 2 petitions to table for a total of 400 people, calling on the government to spend the money necessary to maintain the rail link between Bathurst and Miramichi, to keep the tracks open so that rail service can continue towards eastern New Brunswick and Quebec. So 400 people have signed these petitions.
British Columbia Southern Interior.
Oh, fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 2 petitions. The first one is from residents of Rawson, BC, asking us to refrain from making any changes to the Seeds Act or the Plant Breeders' Rights Act through Bill C-18. And the second one is in support of my Bill C-571 that comes under here C-322 to prohibit the importation or exportation of horses for slaughter for human consumption, as well as horse meat products for human consumption. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions. Présentation des pétitions. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask that all questions be allowed to stand.
Is that agreed? Agreed and so ordered. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that all notices of motions for the production of papers be allowed to stand.
And is that agreed?